Zixthala pressed his 4 hands against the transport window as the massive space station came into view. The new frontier looked nothing like the clean white stations of his home system. This human-built structure had strange angles and what appeared to be scorch marks along its hull. His crystalline skin shifted to a nervous purple color as he wondered if those were battle damage or just poor maintenance. The docking process felt rougher than anything he had experienced before, instead of the gentle magnetic coupling used. Throughout civilized space, the human station grabbed their transport with mechanical clamps that made the whole ship shake. Zixthala's travel bag fell from the overhead compartment and hit him on one of his eye stalks. "Welcome to human space, bug boy," laughed Krektor, a Domination Empire student who had been making jokes about Zixthala's appearance for the entire journey. "Hope you survive your first day." Zixthala ignored the insult and gathered his belongings. He had worked too hard to get accepted into the Galactic Engineering Academy to let some bully upset him. His thesis on comparative safety protocols would be groundbreaking. Research that could save lives across dozens of species. The airlock opened with a loud hiss that made several passengers jump. A human male stood waiting for them, wearing what looked like a maintenance uniform covered in stains and small burn marks. His face had several scars, and one of his arms appeared to have been replaced with mechanical parts. "Welcome to New Frontier Station," the human said with a smile that showed slightly damaged teeth. "I'm Jake Martinez, your safety instructor. Follow me and try not to touch anything that's glowing." Zixthala's skin turned a deeper shade of purple. Was this human joking about glowing objects, or was the station actually that dangerous? He pulled out his recording device and began taking notes. On vegan stations, safety instructors wore pristine uniforms and had never suffered workplace injuries. Jake led them through corridors that hummed with barely contained energy. Pipes ran along the walls without proper shielding, and several junction boxes had warning signs in multiple languages. Most disturbing of all, human students walked past these hazards as if they were perfectly normal. "Our first stop is the orientation room," Jake announced, stepping over what appeared to be a small pool of some kind of fluid. "Watch your step there. Coolant leak from yesterday. Maintenance will get to it eventually." A Centauri student nearly fainted. Zixthala made another note. Humans allowed dangerous leaks to remain unrepaired for extended periods. The orientation room looked like it had seen better days. The walls were marked with burns and dents, and several chairs were held together with metallic tape. Jake stood at the front next to a display screen that flickered occasionally. "All right, everyone, take a seat. Don't worry about the sparking chair in the back row. It's mostly safe." Jake gestured casually toward a chair that was indeed throwing small electrical sparks. "We'll start with basic station safety." Zixthala sat as far from the sparking chair as possible and activated his recording device. This was going to be valuable research material. "First rule of human engineering," Jake began, "if it's not making noise, it's probably broken. Second rule, if it's making too much noise, it might explode. Third rule, minor explosions are part of the learning process." Several alien students made distressed sounds. Zixthala's skin was now completely purple with shock. Explosions were part of learning. On vegan stations, a single minor explosion would shut down an entire section for weeks of investigation. "Now I know some of you come from species that prefer what you call safe working conditions," Jake continued with what might have been humor. "Here's the thing about safe conditions. They don't exist in real engineering. Space wants to kill you, radiation wants to cook you, and machinery wants to crush you. Our job is to get the work done anyway." A human student with short brown hair raised her hand. Jake nodded at her. "Lisa Taylor, geology major," she introduced herself. "Instructor. Martinez, what about the radiation exposure limits for this week's asteroid mining exercise?" "Good question, Lisa. Try to stay under double the normal safe limit. If you start glowing green, that's when you need to worry." Zixthala's recording device nearly fell from his trembling hands. "Double the safe limit? Glowing green?" he began, typing furiously on his communication device, preparing an emergency message to his home world. Another human student, this one with dark hair and grease stains on his shirt, spoke up without raising his hand. "Danny Wu, reactor maintenance." We still doing that field trip to the core tomorrow? My girlfriend wants to know if I'll be too radioactive for our date this weekend. Jake laughed at this question about deadly radiation exposure. Danny, you know the rules. Shower twice and take the detox pills. You should be fine for close human contact by Saturday. The casual way these humans discussed radiation poisoning and toxic contamination made Zixala feel sick. He finished typing his emergency evacuation request and sent it with maximum priority coding. Any other questions about basic safety? Jake asked the room. A brave Altarian student raised a tentacle. Instructor Martinez, what emergency procedures should we follow if there's a hull breach? Hull breach. Jake scratched his scarred chin. Well, first you try to plug it with whatever's handy. If that doesn't work, you seal off the section and keep working. We've had 3 hull breaches this month, and nobody's died yet. Nobody's died yet, as if death was just an acceptable risk. That sometimes happened. Zixtala was beginning to understand why humans were classified as a Deathworlder species. They didn't just come from a dangerous planet. They brought that danger with them wherever they went. Tomorrow, we'll tour the reactor core and the waste processing center, Jake announced as he began gathering his materials. We're close, you. Don't mind getting a little contaminated? Class dismissed. As the students filed out, Zixtala remained in his seat, staring at his notes. Everything he had witnessed contradicted basic safety principles that were universal throughout civilized space. Either humans were completely insane, or there was something about them that he didn't understand. His communication device chimed with a reply from his home world. Request denied. Complete your studies as planned. Zixthala looked at the sparking chair and the stained walls and the casual way Jake had discussed explosions and radiation. Tomorrow, he would have to go inside a human reactor core. His skin turned the deepest purple it had ever been. Zixthala spent the entire night sending messages to every authority he could think of. The Galactic Safety Council, the Interspecies Education Board, even his own planet's embassy. Every reply was the same. Complete your studies and stop making. Troubled by morning, his skin had faded from deep purple to a sickly gray color. He had barely slept, too worried about the reactor tour that Jake Martinez had promised. On civilized worlds, reactor cores were surrounded by multiple layers of protection. Students viewed them through reinforced screens from safe distances measured in kilometers. The meeting point was in what humans called the maintenance deck. Zixthala arrived early, hoping to find some evidence of proper safety equipment. Instead, he found a collection of worn coveralls hanging on hooks and a bin full of what looked like simple breathing masks. "Morning, Zix," called a familiar voice. Lisa Taylor approached, carrying a tool bag that seemed to contain sharp and dangerous implements. "Ready for the fun part?" "Fun part?" Zixtala's voice cracked slightly. "You consider exposure to deadly radiation fun?" Lisa laughed and began pulling on a set of coveralls. "Deadly? Who told you reactor cores were deadly?" "My little brother does field trips to reactor cores with his middle school class back on Earth." Before Zixthala could process this information, Danny Wu appeared from a side corridor. He was already wearing coveralls and carrying what appeared to be actual tools instead of remote manipulation devices. "Hey Lisa, did you bring the sandwiches?" Danny asked while checking his tool bag. "I always get hungry when I'm working near the core. Something about the radiation makes me need more food." "Sandwiches." Zixthala stared at them both. "You eat food while exposed to reactor radiation?" "Sure," Danny replied as if this was the most normal thing in the universe. "Gosh. Jake says the radiation actually helps preserve the food. Natural sterilization." More students began arriving, both human and alien. The humans chatted casually while putting on their coveralls. The aliens looked as terrified as Zixthala felt. A Centauri student was actually shaking, his blue skin turning pale. Jake Martinez arrived carrying a clipboard and wearing coveralls that had more stains than Zixthala had ever seen on a single piece of clothing. Behind him walked a human female, wearing what appeared to be a military uniform with captain's insignia. "Everyone, this is Captain Amy Rodriguez, our station commander," Jake announced. "She wanted to meet our exchange students before we head down to the core." Captain Rodriguez smiled at the group. Zixtala noticed she had a scar running from her left ear to her chin, and her hands showed signs of old burns. Welcome to New Frontier Station. I hope you're enjoying your stay. Captain Rodriguez Zixtala found himself speaking before he could stop himself. Are you aware that your safety protocols don't meet galactic standards? The captain's smile widened. You mean they're too strict? Yeah, we get that complaint from human crews sometimes. But we have to accommodate other species, so we use extra precautions. Extra precautions? Zixtala's recording device nearly fell from his shaking hands. These humans considered their terrifying lack of safety measures to be extra precautions. All right. Everyone, let's get moving, Jake called out. Ben Parker is waiting for us at the core access tunnel. They walked through corridors that seemed to get warmer and more humid as they descended. Strange sounds echoed from behind the walls, and Zixtala could swear he heard something that sounded like controlled explosions in the distance. Those are the waste processing units, Lisa explained, noticing his nervous expression. They use small explosions to break down dangerous materials. Pretty efficient system. They use explosions for waste processing, Zixtala thought as he made another note. He was beginning to understand why so few non-human species chose to study at human institutions. The core access tunnel was a metal corridor that felt uncomfortably warm. Ben Parker waited for them at the entrance. He was a large human male, wearing coveralls that seemed to be held together mostly by patches and hope. Arms were covered in scars that looked like burn marks. Welcome to the real engineering section, Ben said with a grin that showed several missing teeth. Hope you're not afraid of a little heat. A little heat? The temperature readings on Zixtala's suit were already showing levels that would be dangerous for extended exposure. How hot was Zixtala it going to get? They walked through the tunnel in single file. The walls were lined with pipes that glowed with internal heat. Warning signs in multiple languages covered every surface, but the humans ignored them completely. Danny Wu actually reached out and touched one of the pipes to test its temperature. Feels good today, Danny commented. Sometimes it gets so hot. You can't touch the walls at all. Sometimes. The Centauri student's voice was barely a whisper. How hot does it get? Oh, maybe hot enough to cook food, Ben replied casually. We've had maintenance crews bring their lunch and heat it up on the pipes. Saves time. They emerged from the tunnel into a vast chamber that took Zixtala's breath away. The reactor core rose from the center of the room like a metal mountain. Energy flowed through transparent tubes, creating patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. The air itself seemed to buzz with power. Beautiful, isn't it? Jake said, breathing deeply as if the radioactive air was fresh mountain breeze. This is what real engineering looks like. Ben led them to a control station that was positioned what seemed like dangerously close to the core itself. We'll be doing routine maintenance today. Nothing too exciting, just replacing some cooling tubes and checking the radiation baffles. Routine maintenance? Zixtala watched in horror as Ben pulled out tools that looked like they belonged in a primitive workshop. Don't you use automated systems? Automated systems break down, Ben explained while testing a wrench that seemed to be made of simple metal. Human hands are more reliable, plus we can feel when something's not right. Zixtala realized that Ben intended to do maintenance work by touch in an environment that should require the most advanced remote manipulation technology available. All right, everyone. Watch and learn, Ben announced. He walked directly up to the reactor core and began opening an access panel. Steam that glowed with its own light poured out, but Ben didn't even step back. The trick, Ben called over his shoulder, is to work fast and don't think about it too much. The human body can handle more than most people think. Lisa and Danny moved to help, working alongside Ben as if they were repairing a simple machine. Instead of maintaining a reactor that could power an entire city, they reached into openings that leaked radioactive steam, manipulated controls that sparked with dangerous energy, and discussed the work as if they were talking about gardening. Lisa, can you check the pressure valve while I replace this tube? Ben asked, pointing to a valve that was glowing red with heat. Sure thing, Lisa replied, reaching for the valve without any protective equipment beyond her simple coveralls. Zixtala watched in amazement as the humans worked. They moved with confidence and skill, showing no fear of the dangerous environment. More importantly, they seemed to be unaffected by conditions that would kill most other species. "Danny, hand me that wrench," Ben called out. "The big one." Danny passed him a tool while standing in a cloud of radioactive steam. "Hey Ben, my girlfriend is coming to visit next week. Think we could give her a tour of the core?" "Sure, just make sure she brings old clothes." The radiation tends to stain fabric after a while. They were discussing social visits to a reactor core. Zixtala stared at his notes, trying to make sense of what he was witnessing. Either humans were completely insane, or they were so different from other species that normal safety rules simply didn't apply to them. As the work continued, Zixtala began to suspect it might be the latter. Zixtala was beginning to think he might survive his stay at the human station when the emergency alarm started screaming. The sound was unlike anything he had ever heard. On vegan stations, emergency alerts were gentle musical tones designed to avoid panic. This human alarm sounded like it was warning of the end of the universe. Red lights flashed everywhere, and a mechanical voice began repeating something about hull breach and pressure loss. "Oh, great," Lisa Taylor said, looking up from her homework. They were in what humans called the common area, a room where students could relax between classes. Another meteor strike, another meteor strike. Skin turned purple so fast. It was almost black. Another. "How many meteors hit this station?" "Maybe 1 or 2 per month," Danny Wu replied, not even looking up from the engine part he was repairing. "Space is full of rocks. Sometimes they hit things." The emergency voice got louder and more urgent. Zixtala could hear the words now. "All personnel to emergency stations. Hull breach in sections 12 through 15. Atmosphere loss in progress. Shouldn't we evacuate?" Zixtala asked, grabbing his emergency kit. "The station is losing air." The humans around him continued their activities as if nothing was happening. Lisa kept reading her textbook. Danny continued working on his engine part. A human female he didn't recognize was actually making food in the small kitchen area. "Evacuate," Lisa laughed. "It's just a hull breach. They happen all the time." Before Zixtala could ask what she meant by all the time, Jake Martinez appeared in the doorway. He was wearing what looked like a spacesuit, but it was so old and patched that Zixtala couldn't believe it would hold pressure. "Lisa, Danny, I need some help with the repairs," Jake called out. "We've got about 6 holes in the outer hull, and the automatic systems are acting up." "On my way," Lisa said, closing her textbook and standing up. "Just let me grab my tools. I'll come too," Danny added, setting down his engine part. "Is it the good kind of breach, or the bad kind?" "Good kind," Jake replied. "Just regular holes. Nothing explosive." Zixtala stared at them in disbelief. "Were good kinds of hull breaches." And why was Danny disappointed that nothing was? "Exploding? Can I come?" the human female asked from the kitchen. "I've never seen a hull breach repair before." "Sure, Maria," Jake said. "But finish your sandwich first. No eating in the damaged sections." Maria Santos was making food during an emergency because she couldn't eat during hull breach repairs. Zixtala felt like his brain was going to break from trying to understand human logic. "What about emergency protocols?" Zixtala finally managed to ask. "Shouldn't there be evacuation procedures and safety teams?" "We are the safety team," Lisa explained, pulling on a spacesuit that looked almost as old as Jake's. "Most of the regular crew is off duty, so students handle the small emergencies." Handle emergencies. Zixtala added this to his growing list of impossible things he had witnessed. They walked through corridors that were already showing signs of the hull breach. The air was getting thinner, and Zixtala could feel the pressure dropping. Warning. Lights flashed everywhere, and he could hear the sound of air rushing through holes in the station's hull. "Here we are," Jake announced, stopping at a section where the corridor ended in a sealed emergency door. "The breaches are just beyond this bulkhead. Lisa, you take holes 1 and 2. Danny, you get 3 and 4. I'll handle the big ones." "What about safety equipment?" Zixtala asked, watching them prepare tools that looked completely inadequate for space repair work. "We've got suits," Jake replied, patting his patched spacesuit. "And these." He held up what looked like a simple metal plate and some kind of bonding compound. "You're going to repair hull breaches with metal plates and glue." It works every time, Danny said cheerfully. Well, most of the time. Sometimes we have to try twice. Sometimes they have to try twice. Zixthala realized that humans considered catastrophic failure to be a minor inconvenience that might require a second attempt. Jake opened the emergency door. They stepped into a section of the station that was actively venting atmosphere into space. Zixthala could see stars through several holes in the outer wall, and the air was so thin he could barely breathe. Even with his emergency breathing apparatus, the humans began working immediately. Jake approached the largest hole, which was big enough to put his arm through, and began measuring it with a simple ruler. Lisa and Danny spread out 2 smaller holes. Working with the casual efficiency Zixthala was beginning to recognize as normal human behavior in crisis situations. "This is a nice one," Jake called out, examining the large hole. "Clean edges, no structural damage, should patch up easy. A nice hole in the station's hull." Zixthala watched Jake begin cutting a metal plate to fit over the breach. He was working in near-vacuum conditions, with stars visible through the hole, and he was describing it as nice. "Lisa, how's your section?" Jake asked, while applying some kind of bonding compound to his patch. "Good holes," Lisa replied, from where she was sealing. A breach with what appeared to be advanced duct tape. The meteor went right through without hitting any important systems. "Danny?" "One of mine hit a power conduit," Danny called back. "But I rerouted the power through the backup system. Should be fine. Should be fine." Danny had just performed emergency electrical repairs in a damaged section of a space station. His assessment was that it should be fine. Maria Santos appeared carrying a tray of drinks. "I thought you might get thirsty," she said, somehow managing to balance the tray in the low-pressure environment. "Thanks, Maria," Jake said, accepting a cup of what smelled like coffee. "Want to learn how to patch a hole breach?" "Sure." Maria set down her tray and picked up a metal plate. "It looks easy." Easy. Hull breach repair looked easy to humans. Zixthala watched Maria learn emergency space repair by doing it, with Jake offering casual advice like make sure the edges are clean and use plenty of bonding compound. Within minutes, she was sealing holes in the station's hull as if she had been doing it for years. "There we go," Jake announced, stepping back from his completed repair. "All sealed up, Maria. Nice work on your first patch, thanks." "This is fun," Maria replied. "Do we get to do this often?" "Maybe once or twice a month," Lisa said, packing up her tools. "Depends on meteor activity." They walked back through the station corridors, chatting about the repair work, as if they had just finished gardening, instead of preventing catastrophic decompression. The emergency alarms had stopped, and normal lighting was returning. Danny said as they reached the common area, "You look kinda sick, are you okay?" Zixthala realized his skin had turned a color he didn't even have a name for. "I think I need to sit down." "Hull breach repairs can be tiring the first time," Lisa said sympathetically. "You'll get used to it. Get used to it, as if emergency." Repairs to prevent the station from losing all its air was something he would need to do regularly. "I have a question," Zixthala said, trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. "How many emergencies does this station have?" "Emergencies?" Jake thought for a moment. "Well, we had the hull breach today. Yesterday there was a small fire in the waste processing unit. Last week we had a power failure that lasted about 6 hours. Oh, and there was that coolant leak on Tuesday, but that wasn't really an emergency." "How many of these events would shut down a normal space station?" "All of them," Maria replied cheerfully. "But this isn't a normal space station. This is a human station." Zixthala stared at his notes, trying to understand what made a human station different from a normal one. Slowly, a terrible thought began to form in his mind. Maybe the problem wasn't that humans ignored safety protocols. Maybe the problem was that humans didn't need safety protocols. The next morning, Zixthala sat in Professor Carl Johnson's comparative biology class with his mind still spinning from the hull breach repairs. He had spent half the night researching human physiology in the station's database, and what he found made no sense according to everything he knew about life in the galaxy. Professor Johnson was a tall human male with gray hair and hands that bore the familiar scars Zixthala was learning to recognize on all humans. Today's lesson was supposed to be about environmental adaptation in different species. Today we're going to discuss why different species evolved different survival strategies. Professor Johnson began activating a display screen that showed images of various alien homeworlds. Let's start with something familiar. Who can tell me about vegan environmental conditions? Zixthala raised one of his four hands. The vegan homeworld has stable weather patterns, low radiation levels, and no dangerous predators. The atmosphere is perfectly balanced for carbon-based life. Excellent. A very safe, stable environment. What about Centauri Prime? A blue-skinned Centauri student answered nervously. Similar to the vegan world, very stable. Our ancestors never had to deal with environmental dangers. Professor Johnson nodded. Right. Most inhabited worlds in the galaxy share these characteristics. Stable climates, safe atmospheres, manageable radiation levels. That's why most species evolve similar safety requirements. He paused and looked directly at Zixthala. But there are exceptions. The screen changed to show an image that made several alien students gasp. It was a world covered in violent storms, with lightning that looked powerful enough to destroy cities. The oceans were dark and filled with massive creatures that appeared to be fighting each other. This is Earth, Professor Johnson said calmly. Human homeworld. As you can see, it's somewhat different from the galactic standard. Somewhat different was the biggest understatement Zixthala had ever heard. Earth looked like the kind of world that civilized species would use as a prison. Planet. The atmosphere contains oxygen at levels that are mildly toxic to most species, Professor Johnson continued. The weather produces regular catastrophic events. The surface is covered with predatory life forms that hunt in organized groups. The radiation levels from the local star would require protective equipment for most galactic species. Tony Chen, a senior human student, raised his hand. Professor, is it true that most aliens need breathing equipment just to visit Earth? That's correct, Tony. Standard galactic atmosphere suits are required for most species. The oxygen levels alone would cause cellular damage within hours. Zixthala stared at the images of Earth. Professor Johnson, how did any species evolve to intelligence in such conditions? Excellent question. The answer is adaptation. Humans didn't evolve despite Earth's dangers. They evolved because of them. Every system in the human body had to become resistant to damage just to survive childhood. Dr. Patricia Lee, the station's safety compliance officer, entered the classroom, carrying a medical scanner and what looked like a first aid kit. Sorry I'm late, Carl. Mind if I contribute to today's lesson? Perfect timing, Patricia. We're discussing human environmental adaptation. Dr. Lee set up her equipment and smiled at the class. I thought you might like to see some practical examples. Tony, would you mind helping with a demonstration? Tony Chen walked to the front of the class. Dr. Lee activated her medical scanner and began taking readings. This is a standard medical scanner used throughout galactic space, Dr. Lee explained. It's designed to detect injury and illness in most known species. Let's see what it shows for a normal, healthy human. The scanner began beeping immediately. Warning lights flashed, and an automated voice began listing medical alerts. Cellular radiation damage detected. Toxic exposure levels present. Bone density indicates recent trauma. Recommend immediate medical intervention. Is Tony injured? Asked a worried Altarian student. No, Dr. Lee replied. This is what a healthy human looks like to galactic medical equipment. The scanner is detecting normal human physiology and interpreting it as severe injury because it's designed for species that didn't evolve on Deathworlds. She adjusted the scanner settings. If I recalibrate for human normal ranges, we get a different reading. The warning stopped, and the scanner displayed normal health indicators. Tony, would you mind showing the class your hands? Dr. Lee asked. Tony held up his hands, and Zixthala could see they were covered in small scars and calluses. What looked like old burn marks decorated his fingers. These are normal human hands, Dr. Lee explained. The scarring you see represents routine damage from daily activities. Humans heal from minor injuries so quickly that they often don't notice them occurring. Minor injuries? Zixthala found himself speaking without meaning to. Those look like serious trauma marks. To your species, yes. To humans, this is equivalent to the wear patterns you might see on well-used tools. Tony, when did you get that burn on your thumb? Tony looked at his hand. Which one? Oh, that one. Yesterday when I was fixing the coffee machine, touched a hot component by accident. And it doesn't hurt anymore? Not really. Might be a little tender if I press on it. Dr. Lee turned back to the class. Human cellular regeneration operates at speeds that most species would consider supernatural. They also have pain tolerance levels that evolve to ignore damage that would incapacitate other forms of life. Professor Johnson activated another display. This brings us to the interesting question of human safety protocols. Dr. Lee, would you explain why human safety standards seem so relaxed to other species? Gladly, human safety protocols aren't actually relaxed, they're optimized. For human physiology, for example, our radiation exposure limits are set at levels that would kill most galactic species within days. But humans can tolerate those levels indefinitely without permanent damage. How is that possible? Asked the Centauri student. Evolution, Professor Johnson replied. Earth's background radiation is higher than most inhabited worlds. Natural selection favored humans who could repair cellular damage from radiation exposure. Over millions of years, this became an automatic biological function. Zixtala thought about Danny Wu eating lunch next to the reactor core, about Lisa Taylor working in radioactive steam, about Jake Martinez treating explosion damage as routine maintenance. Professor Zixtala said slowly, Are you saying that humans don't ignore safety protocols? They just don't need them. Exactly. What looks like dangerous recklessness to other species is actually humans operating within their natural safety margins. A human can survive and work in conditions that would require emergency evacuation for most galactic species. Tony Chen spoke up again. That's why human colonies can be established on worlds that other species consider uninhabitable. We're not braver or more advanced. We're just built for worse conditions. Dr. Lee packed up her medical equipment. It's also why human engineering stations have the best emergency response records in galactic space. When something goes wrong, humans can work in damaged environments that would kill other species. The implications hit Zixtala like a physical blow. Every terrifying moment he had experienced on the station, every casual response to danger that had seemed like insanity, suddenly made perfect sense. Humans weren't ignoring safety because they were reckless. They were ignoring safety because they were safety. Professor Johnson, Zixtala said, his voice shaking slightly. If humans are this much more resilient than other species, why do they follow any galactic safety protocols at all? Professor Johnson smiled, because they're not just sharing space with other humans. When you have vegans and Centauri and Altarians working alongside humans, you need to design safety systems for the most vulnerable species present. Human stations that serve multiple species actually use much stricter safety protocols than pure human facilities. Much stricter. The terrifying lack of safety measures Zixtala had witnessed was actually humans being extra careful to accommodate weaker species. What would a pure human facility look like? Zixtala asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Well, Tony Chen said thoughtfully, back home on Earth, my dad works at a geothermal power plant built inside an active volcano. He says it's pretty relaxing work inside an active volcano. Relaxing work. Zixtala stared at his notes, finally, understanding what he had been witnessing. Humans weren't dangerous because they ignored safety. Humans were safe because they had evolved beyond the need for safety. The revelation changed everything he thought he knew about Deathworlds, about survival, and about what it meant to be human. 3 weeks later, Zixtala sat in his dormitory room writing the final report for his thesis. His skin had returned to its normal pale green color, and he no longer jumped every time he heard the station's normal operational sounds. The document on his screen looked nothing like the safety violation report he had originally planned to write. A soft chime at his door interrupted his work. "Come in," he called, expecting one of his classmates. Instead, Admiral Kate Phillips entered his room. Zixtala had heard about the Admiral, but never seen her in person. She was a tall, human female, with silver hair and more scars than any person he had ever encountered. Her uniform carried decorations from conflicts across the galaxy. "Zixtala, I hope I'm not disturbing your studies," Admiral Phillips said with a smile that showed teeth that had clearly been replaced more than once. "Not at all, Admiral. Please sit down." Zixtala gestured to the room's single chair while he remained on his sleeping platform. "I understand you've been having an interesting educational experience here," the Admiral said, settling into the chair with the easy grace of someone comfortable in dangerous environments. "Professor Johnson tells me your thesis has taken an unexpected direction." "Yes, Admiral. I came here to document safety violations, but I learned something completely different." Admiral Phillips nodded. "Mind if I share some experiences that might interest you? I've been working with multi-species crews for 20 years, and I've learned a few things about human capabilities." Zixtala activated his recording device. "I would be honored to hear your experiences. Last month, my ship, the Earth's Fortune, responded to a distress call from a Centauri research vessel. They had suffered engine failure near a gas giant with extremely high radiation levels. The radiation was so intense that our Centauri crew members couldn't even enter the same section of our ship as the rescue equipment." The Admiral paused, looking out the small window at the stars beyond. "My human crew put on standard work suits and went out to make repairs. Not full radiation suits, mind you, just regular maintenance gear. They worked for 6 hours in radiation that would have killed most galactic species in minutes." 6 hours? Zixtala made a note. "How much radiation exposure did they receive?" "According to galactic safety standards, they should have been dead 3 times over. According to human medical standards, they needed to take some vitamins and get extra sleep for a few days." Admiral Phillips stood and walked to the window. "The Centauri crew couldn't understand how we survived. They kept asking about our advanced medical technology, our special protective equipment, our genetic modifications. They couldn't accept that we didn't have any of those things." "What did you tell them?" "The truth, that humans evolved on a world that wanted to kill us every single day, and we got very good at not dying." Zixtala thought about everything he had witnessed during his time on the station. "Admiral, how do other species react when they learn about human capabilities?" "It varies. Some species like yours eventually understand that we're not reckless. We're just built differently. Others never accept it. I've had alien safety inspectors shut down human operations because they couldn't believe our casualty rates were so low." "Low casualty rates?" Admiral Phillips laughed, a sound that contained more experience with danger than Zixtala had accumulated in his entire life. "Human engineering projects have the lowest accident rates in galactic space. Not because we're more careful, but because we can survive accidents that would kill other species. What looks like a major disaster to others might just be a minor inconvenience to us." She returned to her chair and looked directly at Zixtala. "I'm here because I wanted to ask you something. Your thesis research has given you a unique perspective on human capabilities. What do you think that means for the future of galactic cooperation?" Zixtala considered the question carefully. "I think it means humans aren't just another species in the galactic community. You're something new. You're survivors in a way that most of us can't understand." "Go on." "When other species encounter dangerous situations, we create safety protocols to protect ourselves. When humans encounter dangerous situations, you become the safety protocol for everyone else." Admiral Phillips smiled, and Zixtala noticed. It was the first completely genuine smile he had seen from a human during his entire stay. "That's very perceptive. Would you be interested in including some additional information in your thesis?" She activated a small device that projected a holographic display. "These are casualty reports from mixed species operations over the past 5 years. Operations where humans worked alongside other galactic species. The data was remarkable. In every case, the presence of human crew members dramatically reduced casualties among other species. Not because humans prevented accidents, but because they could work in conditions where accidents occurred and rescue other species who couldn't survive the same environments. We've started calling it the Deathworlder effect," Admiral Phillips explained. "When you have crew members who evolve to survive in impossible conditions, those conditions become possible for everyone else. Because humans can go places and do things that other species can't." "Exactly. We're not superior. We're just adapted to a different definition of survivable. Zixtala looked at the data, understanding flooding through him. That's why human stations are becoming centers for galactic research and education. It's not because you have better technology, but because you can provide safety that other species can't provide for themselves. Very good. Now, I have a question for you. Your thesis is going to be read by academics across the galaxy. What do you want them to understand about humans? Zixtala thought about Jake Martinez treating explosions as learning experiences, about Lisa Taylor working in radioactive steam, about Danny Wu eating lunch next to reactor cores, about Ben Parker repairing hull breaches as if they were minor maintenance issues. I want them to understand that when humans seem to ignore safety protocols, they're not being reckless. They're being human. And being human means being a safety protocol for everyone else. Admiral Phillips stood to leave. One more thing. Been authorized to offer you a position as a cultural liaison officer when you complete your studies. We need people who understand both human capabilities and alien concerns. Interested? Zixtala's skin shifted to a pleased blue-green color. Very interested, Admiral. After she left, Zixtala returned to his thesis. He deleted the title about safety violations and typed a new one. The Deathworlder Advantage. How human environmental adaptation creates galactic safety standards. His communication device chimed with a message from Professor Quimdar, his advisor. Back home. The message was brief but excited. Your preliminary reports are causing quite a stir in academic circles. The Galactic Safety Council wants to meet with you when you return. Your research may change how we think about interspecies cooperation. Zixtala smiled and returned to his writing. Tomorrow he would tour the station's experimental sections, areas where humans tested technologies too dangerous for other species to even observe. But now he understood that the danger wasn't in what humans were doing. The danger had always been in not understanding what humans were capable of surviving. As he worked on his final chapter, Zixtala could hear the familiar sounds of the station around him. Machinery that hummed with barely contained power. Ventilation systems that carried the scent of industrial processes. And the distant sounds of humans going about their daily work in conditions that would terrify most of the galaxy. For the first time since arriving at the station, those sounds didn't frighten him. They sounded like safety. They sounded like home.